No questions right now.
Okay. All right. What we talked about last time, if you remember toward the end, we talked about the transportation system management. Which we call TSM. And I told you that how it started and why we started the transportation system management and what was the purpose of it and so on. We talked about that last time. Now, there are four measures that this transportation system management works. The first measures is measure by which hold on. Okay. The first one is measure by which facility demand is reduced effectively. The second one is measure by which facility supply is increased effectively. And the third one is a measure by which facility demand is reduced effectively and supply is reduced effectively. And the fourth one is measure by which facility demand is reduced effectively and supplies is increased effectively. All right. So these are the four measures. So the first measure is we try to reduce the demand, which means the number of cars on the roadway. We want to reduce that. So what are the measures that we can do that reduce the demand, such as carpool, vanpool? Those are the ones that reduce the demand. The second one, measure by which facility supply is increased. So in order to increase the supply, we have to do things such as, improve the streets, for instance. So any type of street improvement would increase the supply. Or we do freeway traffic operations, or we do truck restrictions and things like that. We'll go over those. The third measure is that the demand can be reduced at the same time supply is reduced. So we want the number of cars to be less on the roadways, but in a way, the supply is reduced effectively too. So that happens, for instance, when you do a carpool, you are reducing the demand, but in the meantime, you are actually taking a lane from the roadway and dedicate it to the carpool. So you are reducing the supply too. And the fourth measure is you want the demand to be reduced and at the same time supply is increased. So it's going to work both ways, because if you reduce the demand and increase the supply, both of them causes the congestion to go away. So those are the four measures that we talk about transportation system management. And under each of those measures, we'll have several alternative solutions. You can read this on page 201. Page 201. Of your textbook. All right. Now, the first one, we want to measure to reduce the demand. So usually, if you have taken the microeconomic class, usually what we have a demand curve and supply curve. And here we have miles travel. So vehicle, miles, travel. And then we have the cost per mile. On the y-axis. So we have a demand curve, which is a slope downward. This is called demand curve. And this is called supply curve. So we have a demand curve and supply curve. So what you want to do is, if the demand increases, you go into that direction. And if it decreases, you go in this direction. And if the supply increases, you go this direction. And if it is decreases, you go this direction. Now, we want to have the equilibrium price, which is the intersection of demand and supply. So we want, in order not to have a congestion, we want the number of cars on the roadway be equal to the amount that we have capacity. So the demand should be equal to supply. So if you have a 2-lane roadway, and this 2-lane roadway can handle 4,000 cars per hour, that's the maximum we want to have. So our demand should meet the supply, and that will be the equilibrium price. If your demand is less than supply, then that's the problem. And if the demand is greater than supply, that will be a problem too. So the first measure that we talk about is reducing the demand. So on that, we can have the same graph. So we will have a demand curve, and then we have a supply curve. And this is the cost. This is miles traveled. All right. Now, if we reduce the demand, if you remember here, I said that if you are reducing the demand curve shift this way. So we'll have a demand curve shifting this way. So before we had the equilibrium price, which was here. This was the P1. Now your equilibrium price is going to be here, because we still have to meet the demand and supply. So that will be your P2. So by reducing the demand, the price or the cost per mile goes down. And the cost per mile is, part of it is the congestion price. Your time, for instance, is a cost in transportation. So the less time you spend on the freeway, the less cost it is, because your time worth some value. So by shifting the demand curve this way, that means we are reducing the demand. So because of the reducing the demand, we are able to reduce the cost or get rid of the congestion. So there are several ways we can do it. Some of the example is, I mentioned that, ride sharing. By doing the ride sharing, so that will be what? Carpool, vanpool, or shared taxi system. When you do that, then the demand goes down, less car will be on the roadway. The second strategy could be transit marketing. On the transit marketing, what happened here is, if you market transit, which is buses, railroads, metro, if you market those and more people are using transit, buses, metros, less car will be on the roadway. So then the demand goes down. So we are reducing the demand. This is the first measure. Another one would be improve bus services. By improving bus service, that means getting more buses going, more frequency of the bus per hour. using express bus system, having nice designed buses to move people. So whatever you can do to improve the system operation characteristics, have a clean bus, and whatever you can do to improve the bus services. So by doing that, more people will use buses. Another strategy to reduce the demand is park and ride system. The park and ride system in a lot of big metropolitan area, what the Department of Transportation is doing, or the city doing, they build parkings outside of the center that people can park their car and ride the shuttle to go to work. For instance, for our downtown LA, we have a lot of park and ride system under the freeways that they built, so you can go and park your car there and take a shuttle to go to downtown. So those are called park and ride system. And most of the time, those park and rides are free of charge. The reason we are doing it, because we want to have less car in the downtown area or central business district. So we use the park and ride system. Another way you can reduce the number of cars on the roadway is what? By improving of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. All right. So you're going to build a nice bike route in the city, improving the pedestrian facilities, sidewalks, and everything, so that people can use bicycle or walk rather than taking their car. So that reduces the demand. Less car will be on the roadway. Another thing that we can do is shortening work week. So we are asking the companies to ask their employees to work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, but put 10 hours a day. So that makes it 40 hours still per week. So that way, less car will be on the roadway 1 day a week. Another method that we do is use of communication in lieu of transport. Now, during this pandemic period, a lot of people working from home and not commuting, and having the Zoom, such as what we have, okay, created a lot of people to have a meeting or work from home. So that reduces the demand on the roadways. That's why we have less cars on the roadway during pandemic than before. So that's a very effective tool. Okay, so these are some of the strategies that we can do in order to reduce the demand. That means having a less car on the roadway. Any question on that? Okay, so that bring the congestion down, the price down, and so on. The second strategies that we had was increase the supply. Okay, increase supply. Again, what we are doing here, we have the same graph. We have a demand curve and we have a supply curve. So my equilibrium price here. Now, if I increase my supply, if you remember from the first graph I had on the previous page, my increased supply will be having a curve that shifts this way. So that is increase the supply. By increasing the supply, as you see, your equilibrium price goes down, so your cost goes down. So what are the strategies that we do on increasing the supply? Some of them is general street traffic engineering improvement. Okay, so that's one strategy. The second strategy, so anything you do, for instance, like what we did with the Valley Boulevard. I don't know if you guys remember, several years ago, we have improved the Valley Boulevard. We put the median. We make sure that we have good marking on it and build up a good sidewalks and everything. So we improved, by improving the street, you are increasing the supply because people can go faster on it. Good pavement, for instance, makes people to be comfortable driving at the good speed and so on. So that increased the supply. The second one is the freeway traffic management. Freeway traffic management. I mentioned that before. You know, we have centers that people sitting, traffic engineers sitting over there, watching the freeway constantly, especially during the peak hours, 4 to 6 p.m., 6 to 9 a.m. They're sitting in those centers and watching the freeways. If something goes wrong, they try to get to that person and solve the problem right away so that does not cause delays. For instance, if you run out with the gas or if you have a flat tire, because of all the cameras that they placed on the freeway, they can see you at the center that you have problem, you're stopped. So they send somebody over to help you out to get you out of there. Or if some incident happened, we call incident management. Incident happened on the freeway, for instance, We have seen so many times that a full truckload of tomatoes just turned over on the freeway. Now, they can close the freeway and clean it up as fast as possible, but they are ready. They are manpower ready. They are experienced. They know how fast they can do it. Or we have even seen sometimes the hot asphalt flip over by a truck on the pavement, which is harder to clean up. Okay, but they are ready for all these incidents. So they want to get to it and solve it as soon as possible. You have all these message signs on the freeway that give you a message if there's an accident ahead of you, that maybe you can change your route, or there are delays, or they put all kind of messages. So these are all part of the freeway traffic management that we do. So that is increasing the supply. And in some areas, especially downtown area and so on, we have truck restrictions. For truck restrictions, usually we try to reduce the number of the trucks, especially during a peak hour on the downtown, because the truck causes, one truck sometimes might be like 2 or 3 or 4 passenger cars. So by presence of those trucks, we might have more congestion, especially loading and unloading causes problem. So they are restricting the trucks in a lot of areas where we have congestion. They say we cannot have a truck between, let's say, 6 to 9 a.m. or 4 to 6 p.m. because of the traffic that we have. So they're restricting these trucks, especially for loading and unloading. So that reduces this, that increases the supply. Another one is, I talked about that last time, staggered workouts. Okay, staggered workouts. I mentioned that last time, that usually when we have time versus the volume of traffic, and then we have a, morning peak, afternoon peak. Okay, so these peak happen between 7 to 8 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m. So rather than everyone has to be at work at 8, we're gonna allow them to go to work between 6 to 9. By doing that, we are cutting this peak to a much lower level. So that is reducing congestion, and this is one of those things that increases the supply, staggered workouts. So they can go to work from 6 to 9 and leave between 3 to 6 p.m. Okay, and still work 8 hours. So that's a staggered workouts. All right, so this is the second measure, increasing the supply. Now, the third measure was increasing, I'm sorry, reducing the demand and degrade supplies. So in that case, we have a graph of demand and supply. So by reducing the demand, we're gonna have the curve will be shift this way. That is reducing the demand. And by degrading the supply, the shift will be this way. So this is the degrading the supply. So instead of having this equilibrium, we have this equilibrium. All right. I mentioned that some of the method is HOV. What's the HOV? High occupancy vehicles. Diamond lane. So what we are doing is that by having a carpool lane, we are reducing the demand, but we are taking a lane from the freeway, so we are degrading the supply. So that's one example of that. Or if you have a bus ramps on the freeway, a ramp especially for buses, again, we are degrading the supply, but having a bus ramp increases the or decreases the demand. Or when we are doing a freeway ramp metering, when we are doing a freeway ramp metering, we are doing pretty much the same thing. We try to reduce the demand. That means less car to be at the same time on the roadway, but in a way we are taking a situation where we are degrading the supply. So these are some of the method that we use, or bus streets, or median bus lanes that we have, or curb bus lanes, and so on. Another one is the auto restricted zones. You have seen sometimes that in one area, they are restricting the automobile. For instance, Santa Monica, if you have gone to 3rd Street, for instance, there's no automobile there. So by not having auto there, we have reduced the demand, but we are taking a street away from our supply. So we are degrading the supply. So that's another one. So we have we call it pedestrian malls, or sometimes we have only bus only zone area. That means no cars, but only buses can go. Another method that we can do is reduction of off-street parking supply. Okay, so we can do that. So if there's no parking on the off-street parking, so what we are doing, we're trying to reduce the demand. So you cannot go to that area because there's not enough parking. And because there's no parking, you are not going to drive your car. Or a lot of times you make those parkings, they are very expensive that you don't want to take your car. So for instance, downtown LA, if you go to one of those parking places for a couple hours meeting or so, it might cost you $40, $50 for parking. So if you are taking those supplies away, so people are not going to bring their car with them to that area. So we're reducing the demand. And obviously we are degrading the supply, which is supposed to be parking, number of parking spaces that's available. So all of these measures is reducing the demand and degrading the supply. Any question?
No questions.
All right. And the last one or last measure would be what? Increase the supply and reduce the demand. So that's pretty obvious because we said if you increase the supply, the cost goes down. If you reduce the demand, the cost goes down, less congestion. So if you do both of them at the same time, that will be even better. So again, you have a demand curve this way, and then you have a supply curve this way. Now, by reducing the demand, the curve will shift this way. So that's reduced, that's the demand is reduced. By reducing the supply, by increasing the supply curve shift this way. So your equilibrium will be here instead of being here, so that you reduce the cost that way. Okay, so again, some of those things that we can do is, for instance, if you're reducing on-street parking, that is by reducing the demand, and then we are restricting on-street parking, we're increasing the supply, because the supply, the street get wider, more cars can go through. So we're increasing the supply and we're reducing the demand because there is no parking, people are not come. Another thing that it does increase the speed of the bus movement. So if there's no parking on the on-street, the buses can move faster. So you are increasing the supply, and because you are improving the bus movement, you're reducing the demand also. Or again, HOV is another example of it. Or preferential treatment of lanes. That's another strategies. So there are several of these strategies that you can do in order to do that. Okay, now, so basically what you can do is, there are examples of TSM program in some cities that you can read them, okay? And there are a lot of things that they have, and those are on page 208, 209, and 210. So on table 7-2, it gives you example of TSM program for Twin Cities and Portland. So you can read and see what they have done. So and get yourself familiar with the TSM measures. All right. So you have to do those extra pages, read those carefully and see what kind of a program available for each of those cities and so on. So similar to what I said, I just said a few of them, but there are more comprehensive methods that are discussed in those 2-3 pages. What do we do in central business district, in neighborhood area, okay, major employment site outside the CBD, which is central business district, outlying commercial centers, and so on. So TSM measure that has been done for each of those areas and so on. Okay, any question? So you got to do that reading and get yourself familiar with it. All right, so that pretty much covered the chapter 7. And then what we want to do is we want to talk about chapter 8. So what we're going to do on chapter 8 basically is talking about transportation studies. So we do a lot of transportation studies in our planning. So many transportation studies that we are doing. So usually a comprehensive transport study that we do, let me just say, so I'm talking about chapter 8. So that's the transportation studies. All right. A comprehensive transport study again is an examination of demand and supply. Relationship. To transport. So we still want to know what is the demand and what is the supply. So these are the study that we want to do. Now, what are the procedures that in general we do? So general procedure in our transportation studies are as follow. First, we are setting up an administrative organization. That's the first thing we do. Second thing, data collection. In transportation, data collection is a very important task. We do a lot of data collection. And then we do analysis of present and future status of transportations. Then the fourth step, development. Development of a transportation plan. And financial program. And then we do implementation. And 6, we are updating procedures. So those are the 6 steps that we do in our transportation studies. So this is the way we start and we do that. Okay. Let me see if I have a picture of page 216 that I can discuss with you. Hold on. Okay, so this is a graph on page 216 of your textbook. So this is the flow chart of our planning studies. So basically, what we are doing here is this. Basic planning studies, we talk about that. We have to do population. We have to figure out the economic base. We have to know what is the historical growth of that area, what percentage is growing, physical limitation, and review of local plans. For instance, physical limitation would be what? For instance, if we have any land available for putting any type of transportation facilities. So for instance, the expansion of a freeway, for instance, can we do that? And then we review the plans in that area. What are the inventories? Major inventories. First, we need a land use, travel. That means we like to know where's the origin and destination of the trips, where people start the trip, where they end up the trip. So for instance, we have one area like this. I want to know every trip that people make, origin and destination, and so on, and going this way. So I know the pattern of their trips in that area. And then we like to know what type of transportation facilities we have. For instance, I need to know in that area all the roadways, all the streets, and if there are busways, if there's a bicycle path, if there is a metro, all of these needed to be investigated and know what type of facilities do we have. That's our inventory. Then what we are doing is, from that inventory, we do the data processing. So we take the data and we process it, and then we go and do analysis of it. So to do the analysis, we need this population economic base, and we need all the data to do the analysis. And these are all existing. These are all existing right now. And then what we need to know is, first of all, we have to predict what is happening in that region economically in the future. For instance, 25 years from now, how do we forecast economic activities? I mentioned that it can be done through econometric modeling and so on. And population forecast. We have to figure out or estimate or forecast what would be the population 25 years from now in that region. Based on these two and the existing condition that we had, then we have to set up what are the goals and objective in that area. What are we trying to reach? What's our goal? What do we want to do? How do we do it? Those are objective. First, you have to know what's our goals and how do you reach the goal. To reach the goal, those are our objective. Then we have alternative regional land use development patterns. So based on all those information, how are we gonna have a land use and development pattern? So I talked to you about the land use, that each section will be dedicated to different land use, high density, residential, low density, and so on. So based on that, we can develop our land use map. And then we have a travel forecast. How many people are going to travel from point A to point B? And if we know that, then we have to figure out the alternative regional transportation system. What are the transportation system that's available in that region? This is the supply part. The travel forecast is the demand part. So demand has to meet with the supply, and then we do evaluation of alternatives. Okay, which one would be better to do? For instance, should we expand the roadway, or should we put a express bus lane, or should we put different mode of transportation? We have to do the evaluation, economic evaluation. Which one is cheaper? Which one is more beneficial? And based on that, then we have to figure out and recommend the regional transportation system that we're going to do and regional land use development pattern. So that's the process of the transportation studies that we do, step by step. And we need all these different sections to be done. Any questions? All right. Now, the planning usually the planning usually involve, typically the whole process should include many agencies. Okay, I can read these and you can see that on this same page, on the page, this is the page 116. Okay, so in the bottom of this page, they give you the typical planning process that should include different agencies. Okay, so you have your book, you can read. I'm going to read it and discuss it, and then you can read it rather than writing each of them, but will take a little bit time. All right. The first one would be the state legislature. So these are the government agencies that are involved, some of them. So the state legislature involved in this whole planning process. Second one is the executive branch of state government. The third one will be other state agencies, such as commissions of industrial development, public service, recreation, travel, and so on. The fourth one will be local and regional planning commissions. The fifth, special interest groups. And six will be private and public transportation companies. And seven, multi-state coordinating groups, and 8 will be citizen and citizen groups. So these are all the agencies that are involved in the planning. So somebody who's doing planning, which was discussed here, has to communicate with all these agencies that I mentioned, all 8 of them, maybe even more. As a matter of fact, a few summers ago, I took my high school students to a project that Professor Lum, I don't know if you guys know him, he teaches senior design in our school. He was working for this consulting engineering firm, and they were building 2 miles of roadway, only 2 miles. And he discussed with the students, he presented that how many agencies he had to work with in order to just build that 2 miles of roadways, which it was amazing. A student could not believe that all these agencies has to be discussed, contacted, and worked with. So the 8 of them right here. So you have to work with all these agencies in order to just build 2 miles of the roadway. And beside what I don't see here, there are a lot of environmental groups that you have to contact with beside what I mentioned. So one thing that here is number 8, citizen and citizen group. You want to build a transportation facilities, you gotta have citizen participation, which means that you have to invite people from that neighborhood to come and tell them what you are trying to do, and you have to get their approval.